Are we starting?
I don't know. I'm waiting.
Okay, we are live on Facebook. I think we can start. Thank you for the patience.
I go. Buonasera. Good evening to everybody. Thank you to be with us tonight. And I will say very short and few words about whom you are, why we organize this webinar with the week before in all this time, and what unites us. We are from Società Civile per la Palestina. We are 24 organizations networking together with a common purpose: to get the implementation of international law, to see human rights done, organized, and to see above all Palestine free of occupation, free of colonization, free of apartheid. That's what keeps us together: love for humanity, love for justice. And we would like to do this webinar also to make the Italian population, the Italian public, as much as possible aware of what it means to live in Palestine, what it means to have a flagrant violation of human rights every day committed by Israel, and not in the international community there is a way to stop them, to make Israel to implement all the resolution which says that the settlement are illegal, that demolition of houses is illegal, that putting in jail children is illegal, detention administrative is illegal. But we want to do these things together with personality which are really well known and really absolutely active. And we are very honored tonight to start with Hanan Ashrawi and Shawan Jabarin, two persons who are so fundamental in the Palestinian struggle, in the civil rights, in human rights, in also diplomacy. And next time we will have other people that are very important: Chantal Meloni, Emily Schaffer, Omar Barghouti, and many others, which will discuss with us and give us tools to see how we can better work to show solidarity to the Palestinians and to make ourselves also committed more, because the responsibility of the situation is in the international community, in our government, in Europe. So thank you very much to be with us. And I'm really sure that we will be interested in what is going to be said. And I really thank very much Grazia Careccia. She's an international law expert. She's a human rights activist, very determined, and I left to her to present, of course, Hanan Ashrawi and Hassan Jabarin, which I'm very proud to have here with us. Thank you very much, and hope you stay in tune with us. Grazie, the word is yours.
Thank you very much, Luisa. Thank you very much for the introduction. And I'm really honored to be here this evening to introduce two very prominent guests. If you allow me, I will read their bios because they're absolutely amazing. And I will start with Dr. Ashrawi. She is a distinguished Palestinian leader, legislator, activist, and scholar who served as a member of the Leadership Committee and as an official spokesperson of the Palestinian delegation to the Middle East peace process, beginning with the Madrid Peace Conference in 1991. Making history as the first woman to hold a seat in the highest executive body in Palestine, she was elected as member of the Executive Committee of the Palestine Liberation Organization in 2009, and most recently in 2018. Dr. Ashrawi in 1996 was appointed as the Palestinian Authority Minister of Higher Education and Research. She was elected to the Palestinian Legislative Council, representing Jerusalem in 1996, and she was re-elected for the third wave bloc ticket in 2006. As a civil society activist, she founded the Independent Commission for Human Rights, Miftah, the Palestinian Initiative for the Promotion of Global Dialogue and Democracy, and Aman, the National Coalition for Accountability and Integrity. She serves on the advisory and international boards of several global, international, and local organizations, and she's the recipient of numerous awards from all over the world, including the Distinguished French Decoration, l'Officier de l'Ordre National de la Légion d'Honneur, and several academic accolades, including and the Arab World. So absolutely impressive. And we also have a prominent Palestinian human rights defender, Shawan Jabarin, with whom I have the honor of having worked. Jabarin is the General Director of Al-Haq and a Secretary General of the International Federation for Human Rights. In 2011, Jabarin was appointed to the Human Rights Watch Advisory Board, and in 2013, he was elected as Commissioner for the International Commission of Jurists. And in 2018, he was elected as Executive Committee member for the International Commission of Jurists. Jabarin was the first Amnesty International as a prisoner of conscience after having spent years under administrative detention in Israeli jails with no charges and no trial. In 1990, Shawan Jabarin was the recipient of the Reebok Human Rights Award for his defense of the freedom of expression and human rights. He received a BA in sociology from the University of Birzeit and an LLM in international human rights law from the National University of Ireland, Galway. He's also served as part-time lecturer at Birzeit University in Palestine. So I'm very grateful and very thankful for our prominent guests to be here this evening. We will have questions from the audience, which can be sent to our Q&A. But as the moderator, I have the privilege of asking the first question. So I would like to ask our guests what they think has been the impact of diplomatic efforts on the Palestinian quest for self-determination. So starting from the Oslo Accords and going to the more recent endeavors in Arab states.
Oops.
We can't hear you, Gracia.
Grazie.
I'm sorry, the pleasure of being in Lebanon. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we got what's the impact from the Oslo Accords, and then we couldn't hear you.
Right. I would like to ask what the impact has been of these diplomatic efforts from the Oslo Accords to the normalization agreements between Israel and Arab states.
Okay. Grazia, do you want me to come in? Okay. So Anan, I think that Anan and Shawan, the first question was, you get it, the first question. So I think you can answer this one because the other question will come later. People will listen to you anyhow. So we hope that the contact with Grazia will be restored very soon. Please go on, Anan.
Okay, are we all right now?
Yes.
The impact on the ground. The impact on the ground of normalization or the impact of the agreements?
No, I think that she was asking about the more recent bilateral normalization agreement of Arab countries with Israel. So not on the ground, but...
okay.
No, actually, sorry, can I explain?
Both of it.
Can I unpack my question, if you can hear me now?
Yes, please, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay. So the question is about the impact of the diplomatic efforts from Oslo up to today on issues related to statehood, self-determination, and how self-determination and statehood interplay, internal dynamics in the Palestinian context. so that we understand, from within what's been on the receiving end, the impact of these international games.
Okay, the impact of,
I would leave it to Dr. Ashrawi to give us the first insight from her experience, and then I will pass the floor to Shawan Jabari.
I think we can have a discussion, an open discussion, and Shawan, please feel free to add if I forget something or to intervene. But this is a very tall order, by the way, Grazia, because you're asking a question that covers a long historical period with quite a few variables and quite a few changes. But if you want me to give you the trajectory since the signing of the Oslo Accords, or the Declaration of Principles, and the subsequent agreements, I can say it's been downhill since then. It has really, the peace process became almost a punitive process for the Palestinian people. Israel totally disregarded its obligations, violated all its commitments, and maintained a very aggressive policy of occupation and apartheid and so on, by continuing its settlement project, a settlement endeavor, displacement replacement, by stealing land and resources, by trying to superimpose Greater Israel on all of historical Palestine. And the international community, unfortunately, did not abide by its obligations. Not a single UN resolution was implemented. And you know that, and Shawan will talk about this, I'm sure. International law was flouted with impunity. Israel acted outside the law, and there was no accountability for Israel and no protection for the Palestinians. So matters continued to deteriorate. Israel gave itself the full right to use organized official military violence against the Palestinians, but should any Palestinian under occupation try to resist, then automatically the label of terrorist comes out, and people get either killed or arrested or imprisoned without any trial and so on. So in a sense, it became a very convenient and profitable occupation where the victim was supposed to protect the safety and security of the occupier, and the occupier was never held accountable. And on the contrary, it had a free hand to violate all the agreements and international law and so on, but the Palestinians were held to account, and that we should abide by these agreements, particularly cooperation agreements, security, economic, and so on. Now, the problem with the international community, I don't want to go through all the details because it would take a long time, is that on the one hand, there was collusion with Israel, culminating in the Trump era, which was a total disaster, not just for Palestine, but I think for the rest of the world. Trump introduced the attitude of not just populism and racism and xenophobia and misogyny and a one-man rule. He also made sure that he formed alliances with dictatorships and despotic regimes. And his whole administration introduced the ideological dimension to American foreign policy, both within the Christian dimension and the Jewish dimension, in the sense that the Christian evangelical fundamentalists echoed and went even beyond the Jewish absolutists and fundamentalists when it comes to the issue. So it did not it was transformed into a religious matter of faith and belief, rather than a question of rights and legality and political solutions and humanity as a whole. But he also partnered with Israel. He transformed the US into not just a cover for Israel, but he became complicit with Israel, and they started acting unilaterally on the issues that were the core issues of the agreements, whether it is the settlements, which they declared were not illegal. They even dropped the term occupation from their lexicon, whether it is Jerusalem, which was illegally annexed, and they described Jerusalem, and the US moved its embassy to Jerusalem. whether it's assault on the refugees by denying them their rights as per international law and by attacking and attempting to destroy the UN multilateral international institution, UNRWA, which is supposed to take care of the rights and the well-being of the Palestinian refugees. And in a sense, I mean, defunding everything Palestinian and the refugees and allowing Israel to expand, but in full and outright support, including on the Golan Heights, for example, where they recognized Israel's illegal annexation of the Golan, the Syrian Golan Heights. So you saw a criminal regime, so to speak, in the US partnering with an outlaw, a rogue regime in Israel in order to destroy the chances of peace and in order to, what I say is that they tried to bash the Palestinians into submission. And they used all forms of pressure and threats and blackmail, culminating in the so-called ultimate peace or deal of the century that wanted us to surrender. That's all, to give Israel the right to exercise full sovereignty and control over the land of Palestine. And we as Palestinians would become isolated population centers under the sovereignty of Israel at the guise of security. So all these things happened and culminated in this worst disaster. The problem with the Europeans, for example, is lack of self-confidence. They became very self-effacing. They never wanted to face, so never used their power, particularly their economic partnership with Israel, whether it's the association agreement or the neighborhood agreement or Horizon 2020, in order to put pressure on Israel or to tell Israel that there's a price to be paid. On the contrary, they were locked up in this verbal domain where they would issue statements and condemn and declare unacceptable, as they are doing nowadays, Israel's settlement expansions, but without implementing their own legislation. And not just that, I mean, without even implementing or acting on decisions that they took, like the labeling or differentiation policy and so on. So Israel totally disregarded Europe because it felt that Europe can say whatever it wants, provided Israel can do whatever it wants. And that contributed to the deteriorating conditions on the ground and everywhere. And so, and add to this all the built-in flaws of the agreements themselves that exploited the power asymmetry and that enhanced the control of Israel over the victim, over Palestine. And you have a real lethal combination that incorporated this power asymmetry and that led to further deterioration. And with the international situation the way it is, ending up with normalization. And normalization in many ways is an attempt at normalizing the abnormal, normalizing the occupation, normalizing lawlessness, allowing, putting the Arab Peace Initiative on its head, in the sense that they would exclude Palestine and normalize with the Arab world, and therefore Palestine is only a domestic issue within Israel. And it was an attempt, again, that would take a whole lecture, to reposition Israel within the Arab world, to give it sources of power and influence, to become a major power, a major economic, military, security, political, and of course, intelligence power in the region, but using a combination of blackmail and threats on the one hand and bribery on the other. The US managed to bring into the open the clandestine secret relationships between Israel and the UAE, for example, or Israel and Morocco, and so on, to the point where they expended people like Pompeo and Kushner and so on were going all over the place, just trying to deliver to Israel, not just Palestine, but the Arab world, all the gifts, all the deliverables, including normalization, even up to the last day, the last hour of the Trump administration. This was the sort of obsessive drive to give Israel everything it wants, and even things that it didn't ask for in order to legalize the occupation and continue with its policies to create a situation that would become irreversible. Again, we can talk about that later. I will stop here because you have asked a question that requires a history book to answer. Let's say it is a very critical phase. A lot of damage has been done, and we cannot be satisfied with going back to the status quo ante or even undoing the damage. We have to start a new course in which there will be a different mindset, a different trajectory, and an attempt at curbing Israeli violations and lawlessness, but also an attempt at creating a system of accountability and sanctions for Israel and a system of protection for Palestine.
I think you've done an amazing job in, in a nutshell, covering all these points. I'm sure Shawan would be able to pick up on issues like, power symmetry.
Grazia, I think
it's a crucial point.
absolutely oblivious. Your service is very low. Let me first thank you, Louisa, and everybody, and all the partners in this event. Let me also say,
thank you. I'm sorry, I forgot to do that.
Dr. Hanan, and it's a great pleasure to be with you all this night. I would like to build on what Dr. Hanan said. I think because it's a big question, but I know that she addressed mostly all of the things relating to the internationals and also Israel. But I can say that Oslo, it wasn't a peace agreement, in my point of view. It was no one mentioned, in the agreements, all the agreements, the word of occupation. And without naming the reality and what's going on, and to build on the basis of the international law, it will not lead to any place except deepening the occupation. And Dr. Hanan, she mentioned, during Oslo and after Oslo, the settlements expanded 4 times more. Land confiscation is the same and more than that. The occupation deepening, and even the internationals, they start addressing the question, do you think that 2 states is a realistic slogan? This is why they shift and they start addressing these questions, because they see what's going on the ground. And here I can say that it's their responsibility, because they have no political will to act according to their obligation, not for the ethical reasons for Palestinians or no, we are not asking anyone to act just for ethical reasons. We ask them to act according to their legal obligation, what they signed and what they ratified in the international treaties and international law agreements, treaties. That's what I think the problem was. And I think our leaders, they were not strong enough, and they are not organized enough, and they didn't act as an organization, even at that time. They excluded completely, I think, the legal advisors, and they dealt with that as maybe this is the way it will lead to something. Even the settlements, they pushed the settlements, and they pushed Jerusalem, and they pushed the refugees, and they pushed the water, and they pushed everything to what's called, I don't know what they called it, the final status, stage, or what's this? I think what we are living in these days, it's part of this process. I can't see, I don't want to exaggerate, but I can say we can do more than what we did, to be honest with you. Even with this frame, with this limitations, with this catastrophic agreement, I think we can do more. what we can do more, like for instance, to strengthen the hope of the Palestinians and to say, hey guys, this is the reality in these days. This is what we have, but we can build our institutions, for instance. We can build our political regime, for instance. Dr. Hanan, she left the PLO Executive Committee just a few weeks ago. She resigned. She didn't say everything that she had, but she said main thing. One of the main things I think this is my personal, analysis, is there is no real institution there, and I'm sure that she fought a lot to push forward, things here and there, but no one listened, and it was like one-man show. And even there is no institution, to build on. And PLO, it was excluded from anything and everything. It was excluded. I think it was damaged. It's time, to rebuild the Palestinian political regime. And I think it's a fundamental right for the Palestinian people to participate and also to elect their representatives. I mean here, the maintenance, to maintain, the legitimacy of the leaders. And here, when I speak about Palestinian people, there is a big problem also here, because Oslo divided Palestinians and showed them that they are living in West Bank and Gaza Strip. That's one of the things. The Palestinian people, there are 14 million people everywhere, inside Israel, in occupied territory 67 area, and also in diaspora. That's the Palestinian people. And I think it's a time to re-maintain the identity and also the unity of the Palestinian people, and to give a meaning to that. And they can't give a meaning through, the Legislative Council only. This is, they have to build, the PLO, because this is the legitimate representative of the Palestinians. That's the case. And things deteriorating day by day. I can say it clearly. Maybe some people, they will criticize me. I think the Palestinian leaders, they expired. And also more than that, they lost their legitimacy, in Palestinians' eyes. That's the case. Here, we have to address that. This is one thing. But another thing is, Israel from the first day of Oslo, I think they built strategy. One is just to have like a Palestinian authority, Palestinian something, call it Palestinian Authority, just to put on their shoulders all the things that the occupation and the occupying power is responsible for, according to international law. And to show in the same time, like to send like an illusion, to show that Palestinians, they have an authority, they build their state. And I'm sure many of you colleagues, I'm sure they were shaky at that time, what you can do, what's going on in Palestine. Maybe Palestinians, they are in right track to get their rights. We felt that from the different solidarity groups. They said, okay, before we used to support you because you fought for your rights and you fought for your, and now you started, the process. And maybe you got, and sometimes Israel, they said, they have their authority, they have their full authority here, and the Palestinians, they elect their legislative council. That's the case. Where we are now, I think we are in very, very bad situation and in a very critical time. And Trump's administration, I think, not just deepening, but I can say it's not just a Palestinian case, to be honest with you. What Trump did, it has not just to concern the Palestinians. It has to concern everybody over the world, because it damaged the principles of the international law. It damaged also all the lessons that it was learned after the Second World War, and they built the international regime. And it damaged, I think, the basis of the international regime. That's the case. When they recognize Jerusalem, and when they recognize that settlements is not illegal, it's legal. It's completely damage of the Geneva Conventions, for Geneva Convention. That's the case. And more than that, when they said that Golan is for you, as Dr. Ashrawi mentioned as said. That's an issue. I think we have to look at it. Now the Palestinians, they are fighting for their state, self-determination, to exercise their sovereignty over their resources, their land, all of these things. This is a fundamental rights in our point of view, and internationally it was recognized. And it was recognized also as a state, independent state, to be honest with you. I know that some people, they will come and say, who said that self-determination means a state? But I think state is one form. And the Palestinians, they decided, as PLO, for instance, and they struggled for a state. And also it was recognized by the international community, like G8, recognized the General Assembly, and all states, they recognized it. That's the case. And here now, 2 states, 1 state, it's not that big question. Palestinians, they are willing and ready to have one democratic state in historical Palestine. This is what they said in 65 at that time and after that. This is the chart of the PLO. But you think that Israel, they will give that directly? No, it will not be easy, because of that, they said that 2-state solutions, this is one. But the question also, what self-determination means regarding the refugees? In our point of view, politically, legally speaking, I think the right of return is a condition for the practice and exercise self-determination. That's an issue we have to be addressed, because here we are speaking about Palestinian people, including all refugees. The main issue, the main element in this conflict is also the refugees. That's the issue. And here the question, it's a big question. It's not just, let's us, make deals. And I think in this case, the European, they made the deals, with the principles. They try to push Palestinians to give more and more. What to give? What to give more than, what they gave? That's the question. They gave, roses to the soldiers, after Oslo, because they thought that peace is coming. They gave, for instance, time. They gave, let me say, dreams. They said, okay, it means that they were really in a good faith in that process. But the other side, no. Their process was to exclude Palestinians completely. I think to push them out of their country. And I can approve that by giving facts that this is the long-term policy that Israel has. It's a strategy for them to uproot Palestinians and to send them outside of their country, which it will not help in peace. Now, regarding normalizations, and here, I can't build. I am one from those, they don't believe about the regimes in Arab countries and in the region. But in the same time, I do believe that there are Arab people, they are against, and also they are under oppressive regimes. They are also, their rights also violating on a daily basis. That's the case. But at the end, these regimes will not continue and sitting there forever. That's the case. And here, here I differentiate between what happened between Emirate and also the people in Emirate. What's happened in Morocco between the Moroccan people and the Moroccan regime. And before, long time ago, they were in relations with the Israelis, under the table. Trump came, and made that formal. That's the case. Push and pressure them and push them to do this normal. But they used to have security relations, economic relations, in different ways and in different aspects. They used to have that. Because of that, I'm not concerned about what's going on. But this shows that Netanyahu, he go to his people and say, hey guys, I am the one who can bring you what you want, everything. And you see nothing happen. And he is honest, to be honest with you. Because of that, the people, they are ready, Israeli people, they are ready and willing, to vote for him, in every time, to vote for him, because he knows. But just you can imagine if the EU, for instance, let me speak about EU, just took actions or taking actions against the Israeli. One of the action is, let me say, to not just listing companies here or there and said about labeling of the settlements products, but to take real action. One of that is banning settlements products. Here, I think they push the Israelis to ask the question, why? The question why in Israel is not there anymore. But question why, it's important. And it will not happen without actions, just one action. And this action is built on the basis of international law, obligation, that's the case. Another thing is why they let the settlers, let me say, move in Europe in a free visa and enjoying a free visa. Just you can imagine if they put some of them in blacklist, the question will come inside Israel. And these actions will help, which called the peace camp inside Israel. Today, there is no peace camp. There are individuals believing about that here and there. That's the case. But the majority of the Israelis, you know, they are taking the extreme line side. That's the issue. Here, you know what I think. Now, the question of statehood, theoretical, legal questions like that, we do believe that our state is there, legally speaking, is there. Palestinian, you know, Palestine before Israel. Nothing. We're called Israel before, you know, 48. And Palestine, we feel that two-state solution, or let me say, divided Palestine, if I want to take the partition plan at GA, Palestine state is there, but it hasn't exercised its sovereignty yet. That's the case. How to exercise that? We are not asking them to give us a state. No, we're asking them to open the door before us to exercise our right, the sovereignty over our resources, our borders. That's the case. This is what we are, you know, fighting for. This is what we are struggling for. That's the issue. And here maybe this is a very legal, theoretical questions about the statehood, if it exists or not exist. But what's happened in 2012, it's, I think, the mention of the state and also the status at the General Assembly. It's not about that, oh, they invented the state in 2012. No, it's not. It's not just to open, you know, the door legally before Palestine to join the different treaties, different organizations, and different forms. Where we are today, I think we are in a very critical situation. We have young generation. They don't believe about international law. And the reason behind that was because they see the double standards in the relations, and they see the occupation is deepening every day. And they ask me, I'm teaching also international law. They ask me, what's this international law means? Okay, what you say is good theoretically, but in practice, what it means, you know, and we see. And here, I think this is will strengthen also the issue of by force, you can get your rights. The question here before everybody, really, which approach you would like the Palestinians to take? Peaceful approach, international law? If that's the case, please, could you learn from your long experience in this field as the third state parties? Or the other example they can learn from is Hezbollah in Lebanon. Hezbollah in Lebanon. That's the case. By force, I can get, you know, my rights. This is, I think, the case. And for Palestinians to struggle against the occupation, this is their right. But I think we are pushing all the time as a human rights organizations, as people do believe about peaceful ways, for instance, to solve conflicts, is the international law. Where is the international law today? It's damaged, I think. And also Trump damaged all the principles of these things. Do we want to let him to set the precedent? If they are setting the precedent these days, the question maybe will come tomorrow to Sicily or to Bavaria or to different places also in Europe. That's the case. This is the case. Why you are out? And why you think that you are protected? Because also Europe, it was divided before. And now it's if the law is power and force, I think this is a changeable thing in history. Maybe tomorrow things will change, also in Europe. Or maybe Trump will come again. 70 million people voted for Trump. Who can give a guarantee that he will not come back? The question is how you make it possible not to come back. This is, I think, the case. We see what's going on in Hungary. That's the case. If things like that happen and balance power changed, and you set a precedent, and you allow the Israelis, for instance, you recognize the occupied territory as this is part of Israel. That's one of the things. I don't want to go in, as a civil society, we do believe about peaceful way, for that, but this is the line. International law as a basis, and international law, it's not just for negotiation. International law to negotiate how to implement it, not how to exclude it. Thank you. Sorry for that.
Thank you, Shawan. No, I think there were some very important points. I would like to remind our audience that they can ask questions. The point of power asymmetry that Dr. Ashrawi raised, I think, is a crucial one when we talk about how the diplomatic efforts are being undertaken by the Palestinians as well. So, and how international law can actually be effective. So how is the civil society in Palestine responding to the situation? What are the priorities? What are the strategies and activities that are put in place by civil society? And how can we as civil society in Italy and Europe support and maximize your efforts? Dr. Ashrawi, do you have some ideas that you would like to share with us on this?
I do, because I believe in Palestine we have a unique history with civil society. Because when we were under direct occupation, before the PLO came, before we set up an authority, the Israelis were in charge directly through a military regime. You'd open the door outside your house and there's the army, the Israeli army. Across the street from my house was the military governor. So in a sense, it was a direct, immediate military control. And one of the ways in which we organized our lives and resisted was through civil society. We said, we built institutions, and it was a battle of wills. We built our own universities. We took care of when they closed down our schools, we created alternative underground teaching and so on. So in a sense, one way of resisting was to refuse to comply with the orders of the military governor and the military system, and to create our own system of organization and responsibility, even underground. Of course, as you know, on the first Intifada, it was very clear that this was a decisive period, because they decided that they wanted to break the will of the people while civil society was articulating the message. And of course, the underground leadership and so on. We can talk about this later. But now in Palestine, that we entered into some sort of, not confrontation, I would say competition. Because once you set up a political authority, a political system, you feel that you are threatened by civil society, that you are competing. You are competing for funds, you are competing for legitimacy, you are competing for a constituency. So civil society organizations came under attack. The other problem is that the depoliticization of civil society in Palestine, especially because they were dependent on external or international aid. And therefore they were not supposed to act politically, even though to us, the civil society is not only a safeguard for democracy, but it is, again, a means of resilience, empowerment, and resistance. So we have to place civil society back where it belongs. It has to articulate policies or analyses. It has to challenge. It has to be also an instrument of oversight and accountability on the powers that be, and that is important. And they can, of course, deliver services and they can organize. That's why women and the young people and human rights organizations have been the backbone of civil society. We had, under occupation, we had direct occupation, we had 35 civil society organizations, human rights, organizations. We had thousands of them, but 35 respectable, powerful human rights organizations that were also being, Al-Haq was among the first, I think, in 1978. It was established by Raja and who was it? I mean, several others, Raja Shahade and I forgot the names, but
Jonathan Kuttab.
Jonathan
Nadar,
and others. So it was, in a sense, among the earliest organizations. So civil society saw in itself as a means of holding Palestinian society together, maintaining social justice, defying the occupation and resisting occupation. And we weren't at all apologetic about it because it was a battle of wills. And we formed political committees, neighborhood committees, popular committees, etc., in addition to institutions. Now, civil society leadership has been taken out of the political system. So we deprived the political system from abilities, from skills, from people who are highly qualified and who became members of civil society only. Women in general entered the arena of social justice, and they left, in many ways, political decision-making to the male. And men in our society, of course, feel that the political domain is their, is their monopoly. In the same way as they think of the economic domain as their monopoly. We do have a male society, male-dominated society, patriarchal society, and it is set in many ways misogynistic and discriminates systematically against women. And now with the rise of the more closed and conservative religious right in Palestine, you are beginning to see an assault on women's organizations. But we are trying very hard now, and I believe civil society can make a difference in terms of elections, in terms of affirmative action for women and youth in elections, in terms of restoring the democratic principles and enlightenment, let's put it that way, and a secular approach to decision-making in Palestine. And this has to happen through coordination and through working together in unison, because like any closed political system, they feel threatened by an active and lively civil society system or institutions that can hold the government to account, that can intervene and question and ask for reform and propose ways of reform. And I believe this is very important, also in terms of articulating the political agenda, not just the social agenda, because they have been excluded. So, and I think civil society in the West should enter into real partnerships with Palestinian civil societies. Partnerships on issues, partnerships on objectives, partnerships on areas of expertise and specializations. And at the same time, they should have the information that they can use in order to formulate policy and to challenge their own governments. Because I think in many cases, governments are acting in a misstep, let's say, with their own people. We see parliaments taking decisions or adopting resolutions and bills that the governments would not implement. Like I was talking to the Irish representative today, and it's very clear. You had both houses in Ireland of Parliament adopting the resolution on the produce of occupied territories, but the government did not do it under the pretext that it violates EU laws, which it doesn't. The lawyer who was quoted as giving this advice came out and said, no, I didn't give this advice, and I don't think it violates EU regulations. And yet still, what's his name, Coveney, still states that this violates EU regulations. On the contrary, working in conjunction with the settlements and settlement products and Israeli products is a violation of EU regulations. So it's the opposite. But civil society can be a force. It can be a force for in order to affect political decision making, in order to engage and intervene, particularly with human rights societies, including women and youth. And I believe they can help empower through their partnerships Palestinian organizations who are really trying very hard to have an impact as a corrective force and, as I said, as a power of oversight and policy formulation, and as the guardians, the protectors of pluralism, inclusion, inclusiveness, and multi-party democratic society. It's important, and it's important to resist the occupation, to form a network that would question and challenge Israeli violations, and that would speak out. It's not just advocacy, but it's bearing witness, so to speak, in order to expose Israeli violations, because Israel thrives, number one, on acting in the dark, number two, on distorting the public discourse and spreading lies and distortions, and number three, on impunity, avoiding any kind of accountability. These are the three areas that civil society can work with us on, and globally, in Italy, in Europe, in the States, in the Arab world. And the Arab world, I know it's very difficult because there are very few regimes that respect the civil society work and mandate. And it can serve as a counterforce. For example, the issue of BDS being criminalized. I didn't see enough pushback from civil society to show that this is part of nonviolent resistance, that this is not illegal, it's on the contrary, it's illegal and positive and constructive, in the sense that you want to give the consumer and the investor the freedom to act on his or her own conscience, and to challenge Israel, where governments are not challenging Israel, are not using sanctions, are not holding Israel to account. The individuals and civil society and, of course, the private sector can do that. Now you're depriving them of that right, which is not just freedom of thought and expression, but freedom to act on the basis of their conscience, to hold those who are perpetuating a situation of injustice accountable. This is very important. Or now the very, very prevalent move that has been adopted in Europe and in many states in the States about adopting the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. This came as a result of the conflation of criticism of Israel as being anti-Semitism, and therefore attempting to delegitimize any criticism of Israel and to protect it from any type of accountability. This is very serious. And there is pushback, of course, by Jewish organizations, particularly in the US. While in Europe, governments have adopted bills, they have legislated to punish their own people should they criticize Israel or should they adopt BDS. In the South, I think in Texas or in other states in the US, they adopted a bill that said you will punish those firms and private sector organizations that decide not to deal with Israeli products by boycotting them, by closing off all doors of interaction with them. So it's okay to boycott your own people, but it's not okay to boycott settlement products or the Israeli occupation. So it went that far, it's become absolutely absurd. So we need pushback, we need clarification, we need an explanation of the facts. We need to challenge the distorted version and the stereotypes and the labels that are used against us constantly. And we need this partnership at all levels. You can have a partnership within universities, you can have partnerships within human rights organizations, women's groups, youth groups, and so on. Because it is very important, and advocacy groups, that the Palestinians are not alone, that we articulate a common and comprehensive holistic message, that we challenge Israel on the one hand for what it does, and our own government for either their collusion or timidity or inaction in the face of injustice. I know it's a tall order, but it is important because the attempts to silence the Palestinian voice and version of reality and narrative, and attempts at distortion and creating a false, fabricated reality is one way of punishing the Palestinians and depriving us of the protection that we deserve, that we rightfully need. And I think outside government, even though the gap between public opinion and government is still very wide, the civil society and the public pressure can form an antidote and a corrective force against this distortion and the lies.
That's very, very, very interesting and very good. Some of the points you've raised on the depoliticization of civil society organizations, I believe, is one of the issues that doesn't reach the general audience. And it is something that has deprived civil society in Palestine of an important item on their agenda, which they should have. And so there's been a lot of pressure as well in terms of donors, UN agencies, and a lot of censorship on anything that was of political nature. So we see the imbalance. But I would like Shawan, if possible, to tell us some success stories. Al-Haq has done a lot of work in terms of promoting protection human rights, has had a number of very successful achievements. So would you like to share with us some of the recent successful achievements and some of those that are still in the pipeline?
I will, Grazia, but let me echo completely 100% of what Dr. Ashrawi said. And I would like to add one main point. I think we have a common interest with the civil society everywhere over the world, because we are defending the human rights, justice. That's the principles all of us is working for. The question is here, if we want to let Israel, let me say, undermining the Palestinian civil society organizations, they started here first. And after that, we see them these days in Italy, in France, and the US, and everywhere. They are interfering also in your principles and in your democracy. How? For instance, when anyone criticizes Israel, the state, the occupation, the illegal actions, the crimes, he or she will become as anti-Semitic. This is an issue, which it means that they try to silence any voice come from any place over the world. That's, I think, we have all of us to face and to counter it. This is, I think, common things. Here, I think when you do work like that, you are defending the principles of your democracy and your society and open society. The other one is one of the success, it's the pension funds. Also, those they invest in settlements and in the Israeli banks. We have success, for instance, in Norway, in Sweden, in Netherlands, and in different places. Also, this is the money of the people. Workers here, there. Why they have to invest, your money in the Israeli illegal settlements and in the illegal and in crimes? That's the case. This is the issue, I think. All of us, if we build like a strategy to work against that, because at the end, the occupation, it's not just an ideological element. No, there is also another leg for the organization. It's the economic leg, because they are benefiting from everything. They are taking everything and they are not paying anything. That's the case. The question is how to make this occupation costly. This is, I think, when we make it costly, I think we will shorten the time of the painful, and I'm sure that we will shorten the time of the crime, and we will build the path for real peace. That's part of the issue. Besides also the voice. Let me say, one steps. Another thing is some of the companies, they left. For instance, the Rival case. Rival, it's a Dutch company producing holders. And they used to work, for instance, and providing holders to the Ariel settlement, here also in Hizma, to build the wall. At that time, we worked closely, in this case. It took us a long time, and Gracia also, as a lawyer from outside, she is interested with the academic things. She used to analyze, these illegal actions. And at the end, they left. They left, and I think they said that they got maybe 100,000 euros. That's because in early stage, we work against them. They left and they paid 100,000 euros to Africa. At that time, the deal with them by the lawyer in The Hague to give this money to Hizma and to Al-Khadr village councils, to the people, as part of that. I can say that maybe in a few weeks you will hear something else also, success things here or there. Another thing is also the International Criminal Court, even if it hasn't proceeded yet fully for the investigation. But I think the Israelis these days, they are concerned. They are concerned, and the US, they are pressuring, the ICC, Israel pressure the ICC. And it's a time, I think, to defend the ICC role here, the independence, to go after the criminals, and to end the impunity over the world. Because when the criminals feel that they enjoy impunity and no one can go after them, they will repeat their crimes again and again. That's the case. This is the main lesson, ABC lesson, That's the case. The question is how? How to protect also Palestinians, how to protect civilians, how to, to provide any justice to the victims. This is the case. Because what's going on these days, it's not just a political conflict here and there, discussion, I want, you don't want. No. We see that the people, they pay, the price from their blood, life, everything like that. Just keeping these days, the bodies of those they were killed by the Israelis in the hands of the Israelis, put them in the fridge, or which called the number cemeteries or things like that. And they don't give back, the bodies for the families to bury their beloved, the bodies of their beloved. That's I think it's beyond which called the normal term of occupation. It's completely against the humanity. It's more than fascism, I'm sure that. Nothing like that happened over the world like this. Demolishing the houses, this is an issue. The question, what we can do, against that. I think we have many things to do. Like one of that is, let me say in Italy, we can challenge the Italian government, for instance, not to take actions according their obligation under the 4 Geneva Convention. For instance, according the Article 146. Why they don't act according to that? Maybe we can challenge them in the court, in the constitutional court. I don't know what's the system that you can use. This is just part of this, just to show that this is also an issue, you have an interest in it. That's part, and completely agree with Dr. Hanan for the rest that she mentioned.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this very important reflection. And before we leave the floor to the questions that have been asked by our audience, I would like to read a statement from one of the members of Società Civile per la Palestina, which I really express my gratitude to because of the amazing work they've done with our Facebook campaign. It's the Youth Palestinians of Italy, Giovani Palestinesi d'Italia. The Youth Palestinians of Italy is a group of young Palestinian students and workers, second generation children and young people recently arrived in Italy and living across the country. Our aim, I'm speaking on their behalf, is to bring to the attention of the Italian public and all that is related to the Palestinian issue through the eyes of us, young people. We want to propose new points of reflection with the aim of restoring Palestinian identity, cultivating memory, and going beyond political divisions. Our association is independent, pluralist, non-partisan, secular, and non-profit. So the statement of Young Palestinians of Italy goes as follows. It's quite evident that for our generation, it is not easy to have a positive opinion about the Oslo Accords. We were born and raised after the agreement had been already signed. If the generations that came before us could leave the optimism that came along with the Oslo Accords, we were left with nothing but the rotten and harmful fruits that these agreements mean today. For us, Oslo means the normalization of the situation, the advance of Zionist propaganda, the substantial deterioration of the conditions of both the Palestinians in the occupied territories and the ones outside. But above all, that it meant to us the shelving of the 48 refugee issue, because it has divided Palestine between those who live in the occupied territories and those who live in the disastrous situations of the refugee camps throughout the Arab world. Without an analysis of the Palestinian history that is strongly critic of all the Palestinian struggle experience, that is directed to everything and everyone with the we can't anyway, since this is the only way to produce new ideas and strategies. If we intend to keep following the path traced 30 years ago, living in the illusion of a world that no longer exists, we will always be forced to chase the decision of Israel, which now controls the international debate about the issue in every possible way. We, the young Palestinians of the diaspora, who are the ones most exposed to the propaganda aimed at eliminating the Palestinian issue from the public debate, we more than others must grasp the cultural dimension of our historical task before the political one. We must therefore produce culture, produce historical analysis that reflect on our own past struggle. We must not be afraid of where this research will take us, nor of the discoveries we might make about our past, because critically re-evaluating our past and the protagonists of that period is the only way that we have to produce new culture, and with it, new political ideas appropriate to the context in which we live. The invitation is therefore to create moments of discussion and cultural production such as today's, in which we must be brave enough to destroy those myths that keep us tied to the past, that is outdated, and that don't allow us to move forward. We believe that this is the historic task that we Palestinians of the diaspora have. We have also to help young Palestinians in the occupied territories and refugee camps in the Arab world to raise their voices, to show them that their ideas have a resonance in their fellow nationals abroad. This is probably the most important task that we have today, a task we must take on as soon as possible to avoid giving Israel the main tool he has, time. Israel has all the time it needs, but we do not. That's why we have to move now. Thank you on behalf of Giovani Palestinesi d'Italia, Young Palestinians of Italy. So now we will have a few 15 minutes roughly for the questions we received from our audience. And one of them I think is quite interesting is like, what about Israel youth activists? How can they impact the public discourse in Israel? And what about nonviolent international initiatives in Palestine? And the second question, I will shoot it immediately because it's quite sensational. And I suppose this is all we can handle this evening. What do you expect from the new US administration?
Whom are you asking?
And I think
I was-
there are questions to Dr. Ashrawi, one of that in English, some of them in English, and some of them in other languages. Like Mrs. Ashrawi, could you please repeat
Yeah.
the 3 areas and the other one? Yeah.
The first question I have is about Israeli youth activists. So as both representative of civil society, it would be really good to hear what you think their impact is on the public discourse in Israel, and what the impact is of non-violent resistance and initiatives in Palestine. So I would leave the floor to Dr. Ashrawi first, and then to Shawan.
I'm sorry, could you give me a sort of more focused question? You're talking about the impact.
The impact of youth activism in Israel, and what impact it has on civil society in Israeli youth activism.
Yes, there are different levels of activism in Israel. The traditional peace camp has completely disappeared, as you know, and within the political parties, there is no peace party, and the left has all but disappeared. Meretz has dwindled to just a few seats. The question of solidarity with Palestine, let alone the question of the occupation and Israel's responsibility and culpability, all these have disappeared from the political discourse and from political formulations and alliances within Israel. There is a total shift to the extreme right in the political terrain in Israel. Extreme racist right that attempts to not only silence but render the Palestinians invisible. It's as if we don't exist, the occupation doesn't exist. If you look at the coalition agreements, if you look at the debates, if you look at the elections programs and agendas, you will see that neither the Palestinians nor any chances of peace exist in this discourse. It's as if the wall has rendered the occupation and its victims invisible. But within that very bleak official political situation, I would say there are 2 sources of hope. One are the young activists, and there are really many of them who take risks, who stand up like Yashdin, like you know, all the different organizations, B'Tselem and others are human rights organizations, but activists who go out into the field, who demonstrate, who defend the Palestinian people, like in Aisawiye and in Silwan. You have a lot of people who try to protect the Palestinians as the army and the settlers attack them. Whenever there are settler attacks in different areas, they try, but it's so prevalent now that they cannot protect everybody, but at least they try to be there in the field. But then you also have organizations like the human rights organizations, B'Tselem and others, who articulated a very clear description of what the occupation is, and they exposed the apartheid nature of the occupation. And they are extremely powerful in the sense that they have voices that resonate with Palestine, but also outside. Now, within Israel, people were commenting how the report on apartheid that B'Tselem published was not published in Israel and was not picked up in any Hebrew publication. It wasn't part of the discussion at all. It's as if what they don't like, what makes them uncomfortable, is not part of the public discourse. And this is extremely serious because the public as a whole is being shielded from the consequences of the occupation and what is being done in their name. However, these organizations were attacked by Netanyahu himself. Like you have the NGO Monitor, for example, an Israeli extreme right-wing destructive organization that attacks Palestinian NGOs, and it attacks Israeli NGOs who are supporting the Palestinian cause or who are criticizing Israeli violations and oppression and so on. So in that sense, you see quite a few people who are willing to pay the price. And of course, with people like Daesh or people now 60, I tweeted about this, how while some Arab regimes are normalizing with Israel and are signing agreements with the settlers and with settlement organizations and firms, and in investing, yes, and investing in the occupation and in football team like Bitar, which is the most racist regime that refuses, that doesn't want to see any Arab, that its slogan, death to the Arabs, and doesn't want to see any Muslim, and does not accept anybody to play with it if the name Muhammad is mentioned, for example. So there are, an Emirati person invested, close to the ruling family, invested in them. To us, it's bizarre. It's you have 60 young teenagers in Israel who have refused, who have written and issued a beautiful statement, and who have refused to go to military service. And they precisely mention exactly what the young Italian Palestinians mentioned, is that this started in 1948. It didn't start now, and even pre-48. And they mentioned the Nakba, and they mentioned the historical injustice done to the Palestinian people. So in a sense, they are a very powerful corrective force, a voice of conscience. And they pay a price, they pay a heavy price, because they go to jail and they lose lots of benefits, and they are persecuted, not just prosecuted legally, but persecuted within the mainstream political and economic system. So there are voices like that, and the Palestinian people know of them more than the Israeli public knows of them, because the mainstream media does not want people to know what's happening. That is important. But I just want to, if I may, mention the Palestinian youth, the Italian Palestinian youth. It's wonderful to, I'm glad you read us the statement. It's really very heartwarming and enlightening. And it's great to know that there are Palestinian youth in exile. I don't call them diaspora. I say we're either in refugees or in exile, who are who are maintaining this holistic, beautiful view of the Palestinian identity, the Palestinian presence, and attempting to link up with Palestine to move Palestine to the future. But at the same time, it's very important to maintain the identity, the culture, the history of Palestine per se. I want to tell you that there is now a really concentrated attack on everything that is archaeological, that is human heritage in Palestine. In Sebastia, for example, in Solomon's Pools and near Bethlehem and Batir, there are attacks by the settlers and by the army and by the government in order to confiscate, to take over our human historical sites, the Palestinian heritage itself, and to claim it as their own and to take it over. Even places that have, Islamic holy significance, or the shrine of a holy person and so on, they claim it as their own. So there is a struggle, there is a fight for the identity, for the history, for the culture that is consistent with what Ilan Pape calls the displacement replacement paradigm. They're displacing a whole people and replacing them with others, not just physically as human beings, but also as a narrative, as a culture, as a history, as an identity. They are replacing the names of streets in Jerusalem, for example, with Hebrew names. When they build a settlement next to a village or a Palestinian town, they use a Hebrew version of the Arabic name, because they are competing with us on our own existence on our land, because we can trace ourselves back to the, we are the heirs to the earliest Christian tradition, for example, in Palestine. But they're trying to erase the fact that they were Palestinians, that this is just a Jewish Muslim struggle, and that the Jews were here 2,000-3,000 years ago, so they are coming home. But our refugees who were expelled, who were exiled, who were terrorized, and who left, have no right to come back. And therefore, they have no right to talk about the past. 48 is in the past. The Nakba is a taboo. But in order to deal with the future, to all my friends and to the youth, please link up to the Palestinian youth, because we have some really remarkable people, and I have several meetings with them, young men and women, many of them thinking of running for elections, and they have their own organizations. Please connect, because the PLO is supposed to represent Palestinians everywhere. Now it is weak, now it is institutionally undermined and so on, but they need to be part of the reform and revitalization of the PLO as a comprehensive representative democratic system. And yes, it cannot be caught in the past in the sense that the outdated patterns and modes of behavior and slogans no longer apply, but they have to use our history and our culture and the authenticity of our identity as a launching pad to the future. We mustn't be prisoners of the slogans and the language that is outdated, as I said, but we must have the confidence of knowing that we are an ancient people with a culture, with a history, with an identity that should not be erased. To Israel, this is primary. Ilan Pape's book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, describes in detail, even before Israel implemented, exactly how they are trying to carry out this ethnic cleansing of Palestine and to replace Palestine with all its culture and history with an Israel that was superimposed on Palestine in 1948, and that is now expanding to superimpose itself on all of historical Palestine. So I'm glad that they raised this issue, and it's very encouraging to see in exile Palestinians who have a clarity of vision and who want to move not just the discourse, but the whole case forward. And they have to be part of decision making. That's why we have to find ways of elections with the Palestinians outside. I don't know. Oh, the new US administration. Do you want me to talk about that?
I'm afraid we have very little time left, and I would like Shawan as well to briefly comment on the impact of youth movements on the Israeli society today, because what we've seen is like a lot of what they're doing. Israeli civil society, Israeli activists is, the telling example of B'Tselem going outside. Is like, is there like a, any chance of like influencing the civil, the community, the public in Israel, and so is civil society in Israel able and effective in doing so at the moment?
Look, we admire their work and we look at them as a courageous people, to be honest with you. But in the same time, I think they are not that big group, as Dr. Ashawi said, and I mentioned even that before. The peace camp disappeared, and now the extremists, they are taking over everything here, and they are shaping also the public opinion, to be honest with you. Just you can imagine, B'Tselem, if they want to appear and to address any court or any official body, they have to identify themselves as a foreigner agent. This is in law. This is in law. They have to identify because they are receiving funding from abroad or from, let me say, foreign states. This is, and
what
they
about
have to,
the Israeli government?
They have to say before the court, I am a foreign agent representing B'Tselem before you as a judges or something like that. They have first. If they don't start with that, they will be punished because this is under law. They have to identify themselves like this. This is the case. I think we can't build on that to change things dramatically, but accumulatively, I think we can build. But the main thing is how to create the question why inside Israel public and inside Israel society. It will not be happened like the question why without actions. If there are actions taken by third state parties, economically, diplomatically, politically, things like that, they will start asking the question why, and the debate will start. And here I think one like Haggai and one like others and the youth and different they can engage with this debate. But these days, they see one picture only. They see that Netanyahu, every day he has new relations with the Arab countries, he confiscates more lands, the news, to expand the settlements. That's the case. Regarding now the peaceful struggle, what you call the demonstrations happening every Friday, for instance, from the peasants, the farmers, the youth, different groups, struggling and trying to stop, for instance, the bulldozers from bulldozering and uprooting their olive trees and others. What do you call this? This is, really, really an ideal peaceful struggle. But how the Israelis respond to that? They respond by bullets, they kill people. This is what happened in Al-Mghayr. Just you can imagine, 9 children in 2020, they were killed. 9 they were killed. They were not killed in exchange fire. They killed, because the Israeli, they targeted them. And we have documentation shows that they targeted them intentionally, to kill them. This is what's going on. And here I think the occupation is not reactive. The occupation is proactive. That's the issue. That's the case. That's what we have to know about this. Another thing is, I saw some questions about one state, two state. I say that the Palestinians, they have to enjoy their and to exercise their self-determination. If it's the 2 states or 1 state, it's okay. Let's discuss that. Let the Israeli come and discuss this. The question is not a theoretical one. If the Palestinians tomorrow change the narrative, things will be, easy. It's not like that. And then with the idea for self-determination and enjoying that according to the international law and the basis, that's what I meant. Another thing is, to be honest with you, I'm not concerned from a long-term future. We are not the one has to be concerned. If there is one has to be concerned, not the Palestinians. And what we are doing these days, what are doing as a human rights organization, civil society, others, we are trying to shorten the time of the painful and to shorten the time of the crimes and, bloodshed. That's what we are trying to do, And here I think I'm not afraid. Maybe it will not happen during my time life, but I'm sure that it will happen. Because you can't build your existence on one main element called force and power. This is the changeable thing in history. This is a changeable thing in history. The question how to maintain the hope in the youth and the young generation's minds. This is the main challenge. Could you please help us to maintain the hope in their minds? You can't maintain the hope just by saying words, and from their side, they see things on the ground completely different. They see killings, they see house demolitions, they have see uprooting the trees, see all of these things. No, they can't. They have to see, oh, there are some actions taken by Italy, by EU, by others here. Oh, let's give it time for that. Let's give, a chance. Let's give them, chance to be succeed in this. That's, I think, what it helps. If we want to maintain the hope in the young generation's minds. It will not just become by Shawan saying, oh, guys, the future is for you. Okay, this is one thing, but they see what's going on in the ground completely is different. Killing, humiliations, shooting, they invading Ramallah every night. They go to around, Dr. Ashrawi and Abu Mazen's house every night. They arrest people, every night. When I say every night, I'm not exaggerating. At 3 o'clock early morning, they throw, which called sound bombs. Just you can imagine they threw 10, 15 sound bombs in a Tira neighborhood here in Ramallah, near here or there. What they can do. This is, what's going on these days. Okay, we are weak these days because our leaders, they are weak, but I have full confidence that the Palestinian new generation, they will find their path and their way. That's, I have no doubt. Okay, we have elections coming. I hope that things will be changed. I hope. I keep a hope, you know. And at the end, I keep a hope, to be honest with you. I'm not frustrating. I have a painful, strong painful in my heart because of what's going on, you know, the crimes taking over everything, and that's, but future is for justice, no doubt. And we will get it one day.
Thank you, Shawan, for these words of hope. And like, yes, I mean, there were questions on the US administration. I know it's a bit brutal to ask, do you think that the new administration in the US will bring an important shift in the situation? Or I'll give you a yes and no answer. I'm afraid.
I have no doubt, but I have a hope for the change in the US, which we see it in the young generations, you know. We see that in the schools, we see that everywhere. By the time I think things will change. Just you can imagine today in the Congress, there is around 45 congressmen and women. They are raising their voices strongly for justice for Palestinians. This is very important. And Dr. Ashrawi, she knows more than me about
Dr. Ashrawi.
I'm trying, I don't know what I did, but I'm losing. Can you hear me?
Yeah, no, we can hear you very well.
Yeah, I lost the whole screen, but I can tell you frankly, yes, we do have a rising solidarity movement and a network of solidarity organizations with the US. We have become part of the conversation, the political conversation. We have broken many taboos. You have, as I said, some progressive Jewish organizations. You have minority groups, you have women's groups, you have LGBTQ groups. You have universities and intellectuals and think tanks. So, and now we have also Palestinian supporters within Congress. Bernie Sanders broke a taboo on the question of Palestinian statehood or conditionality of aid to Israel. That's why Israel went to bed with the dictatorships and with the racists and with white supremacists with Trump. And they entered the partnership with Trump. And now they are trying very hard to reformulate their position and to say, no, we are part of the American system regardless. But they are now identified with the Trump system, with the populists, with the autocratic, despotic systems and racist systems. They allied themselves with the white supremacists, incredible, and with the Christian fundamentalists, the evangelicals, in order to maintain their own control and in order to legitimize their own occupation. Now, the mere fact that Trump is out of the White House is in itself very significant, very important, because he was extremely destructive in every possible way. He really thought he could bring us to our knees, he could defeat us, he could destroy the Palestinian cause, and he took steps with people like Jared Kushner and David Friedman and Pompeo and others, where he thought that getting rid of the Palestinian question would give Israel the full right to take over all of Palestine. But now, within the Democratic Party, there are, of course, lots of Zionist and pro-Israeli forces. They are not all progressive. And we are afraid that our progressive allies might be pushed aside, because the people in power now are the mainstream Democrats who were part of the Biden and the Clinton administrations Obama, primarily Obama. Most of them, and I say they are responsible for the fact that they did not succeed in peacemaking, because the US has historically been extremely supportive of Israel. As they say, Israel is their strategic ally. They're not going to become our ally. But what we should do is to start a whole new conversation with the US, not based on how much pressure they can put on us to give concessions to Israel and to reward Israel, but based on what is the relationship between Palestine and the US and on what basis. And that's why it would be very short-sighted and simplistic to say Biden is here, now everything is fine. No. Now we could be facing new challenges. We could be facing the challenges of the pro-AIPAC mainstream Zionists within, for example, the labor majority for Israel that distorted the DNC platform and removed the term occupation from that platform. and did not allow them to talk about conditionality of aid and so on. So there is still a struggle even within the mainstream parties, within the to act with our allies in order to influence policy. We cannot just say, okay, we will have a discussion with the leadership or with the president or with some people in power. No, we have to maintain our conversation, our dialogue, our solidarity with these organizations in the US that are challenging now the prevailing discourse and that are putting Palestine on the agenda and that have made us part of this public conversation and that have broken these taboos. I tell you, it's the first time in history where this is happening, because before it was unheard of to talk about Palestinian independence and statehood and conditionality of aid to Israel and so on, because Israel was sacred, nobody could touch it. But now even within Congress, people are raising this issue. So this is what we have to build on, not to sit back and relax and say Biden is our savior. He is not. But at least there is a door open within the surrounding culture and within public opinion and within institutions. Look, the Black Lives Matter movement, for example, it's a very significant ally to us. And we have had long-term relationships with them for years now. It's not new. And it's not because of take your knee off our neck or something, because it's something that we had in solidarity. The other day we had a seminar on Palestine rights, a literary seminar, and Angela Davis was there. And she said how Palestinians stood in solidarity with her when she was in prison in the early 70s. And I reminded her I was in the university in the States, in Virginia, and we supported Angela Davis because we supported the Black movement and of course the Black Student Alliance. So it's all a matter of continuity. It's a matter of public discourse. It's a matter of forces of solidarity and support within the US that can influence the policy and decision making. We are not a priority right now, we know, and there are many, particularly in Israel and pro-Israeli groups that are trying to tell Biden, you have other things, you have other priorities, you have to deal with Iran, you have to deal with the Gulf, you have to deal with Turkey and so on, you have to reformulate relations with Europe and multilateralism. Don't touch the Palestine issue, which is the advice they gave Obama before him and which allowed Israel to continue with its expansion and impunity. Now there are other people who are challenging this wisdom, and this is what gives us hope, and we have to stay in touch. That's why the Italian civil society can also connect with and network with these organizations in the West and in Palestine in order to have a common vision. We have to, civil society has to challenge decision makers, has to articulate a new agenda, and has to expose the truth and what is happening. These are the things that I was asked about what can civil society do.
Dr. Ashrawi, you have a question. Last one is about if you think to run the election, the next election or not.
I tell people I practice what I preach. I keep saying we have to make room for the younger generation and for younger men and women. And I promised, I've had many people asking me if I'm going to run and if I can support their running. So I'm going to support and even campaign for young people, for new faces, for people of integrity and courage, for people who want to enter the political arena. But I'm not going to run. I think all my life I've been running. Really, from the General Union of Palestine days when I was at university all the way up to the PLO Executive Committee. Now it is time I make room for others and I support others, and I will, and I made promises to many. So I'm not leaving the arena. I will serve the cause of Palestine in every possible way, but I don't want an official position. Thank you.
If she is run, I will vote for her.
Thank you, Shawan. I love you too.
Thank you. I'm really sorry, but I'm afraid we are running out of time available for us this evening, and so we'll have to wrap up. And on these very light and like positive and encouraging words, I think we all have to go back and do our homework and try to find a strategy And I think dialogue is, as it was said, really crucial. We need to learn from one another and work together and keep the issue of Palestine on the agenda, precisely because the politicians want this not to happen. So we need to work together and get this strongly up in the agenda. So thank you so much for your participation this evening, Dr. Ashrawi and Shawan Jabarin. I want to thank as well Giovanni Palestinesi d'Italia for the support in for our campaign on Facebook. And as you can see on our Facebook page, if you want to support these webinars, kindly donate if you can. We know that it's a very difficult time. COVID has put us under a lot of pressure, but you can donate and support these webinars. We will have 3 other webinars coming up between today and the end of March. Thank you again,
Thank
and
you.
I wish you all a very good evening.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Asif.
Thank you. Bye-bye.